Okay. It is 10:06. I may as well call our meeting to order. And Jim, do you have the minutes of our last meeting?
Yes, sir, I do. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
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 Let's see, I better find the minutes here. This is the August 15th. Okay, I'm reading the right one. President Jack Baker called the Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting to order at 10:04 a.m. with 15 members present virtually via Zoom. Secretary Jim Carey read the minutes of the July 18th meeting, and they were approved as corrected. The financial report was read by David Hampton. Total monies as of August 15th, 2020 is $12,816.05. The report was approved as read. Mary Bell Chase gave her Cherokee Moments presentation, reading articles from the Cherokee Advocate from 1844 to October 1846. In old business, Luke Williams told us Megaphone Pro had begun building our website, and final payment will be made after we have reviewed their work. In new business, Becky Hobbs told us the short film Nani He will be shown during the Cherokee National Holiday, both virtually and at a drive-in theater. Go to cherokee.org for a schedule of events. David Hampton reminded us of the Elder Assistance Program for all Cherokee citizens 62 years of age and older. Our featured speaker was Michael Wren, an Eastern Cherokee authority who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. His presentation was Home Place, learning about ancestors by looking at their homes, farms, possessions, and communities. Curtis Rohr announced that the Oklahoma chapter of the Trail of Tears Association has ordered a headstone for Jerry Clark that will be placed with his urn beside the graves of his parents. Eva Garat told us that the Cherokee linguist Dr. Durbin Feeling was very sick and asked that we pray for him and his family. President Baker adjourned the meeting at 11:16 a.m.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Are there any additions or corrections? Not, I would entertain a motion that the minutes be approved as given.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. And Eva, we're sorry to hear about Durbin. And it's.
Yep, we're gonna miss him.
I know.
So much knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the
And it's a
good
bad.
thing we can comfort ourselves with is that he was so meticulous about documenting what he knew about the language, and so we'll always have what he left for us. And I teach a little group of students what he taught me about Cherokee translation, and so they have decided that the appropriate response is to pull up their socks and work even harder to try and rescue what he felt what he dedicated his whole life to preserving for us to have.
Good.
Paying it forward.
Yeah.
Sure are.
Okay. And David, you have Ruth's report on our financial report?
I do. I cannot get Ruth to get on. I think she's scared. She has a microphone because I ordered one for her, but I don't think she'll plug it in. Okay, the total of the checking account at August 15th was $4,200. We had the income of dues of $20, a sale of the back issues of the Messenger, $12. For total checking balance, $4,232. The CD beginning balance was $8,616. Interest earned was $9. Ending CD, $8,625. Total of all money, $12,857.
Okay. Thanks, David. Are there any questions or discussion on the financial report? If not, it'll stand approved as given. And Luke, do you want to give an update on our grant from the Historical Society and how we're progressing there?
Yes, right now we are working on the website, which of course is the largest purchase outlined in the grant. We wanted a new website because the old one was a little obsolete. It's pretty hard to make changes to the current website, so this new one will be able to upload photographs and make the changes, announcing monthly meetings and that sort of thing. So right now they are setting up PayPal on the new website where people can join the association PayPal on the website, and also they can purchase a subscription to the Goingsnake Messenger. So that's where we are right now on that. I sent all the photographs and other information that they needed. So they are working on that and should hear from them probably, I would say, in 2 weeks or so.
Excellent. Okay. Next is our Moments of Cherokee History from Mary Bell.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My Cherokee moments this morning are going to be expanded. So in case you think I'm just rambling on, you'll know that I've been given some allotted time. My Cherokee moments for this morning are the Doris Duke collection in the Western History Collections at the University of Oklahoma. This collection may be researched online. Doris Duke was a tobacco heiress from North Carolina, and most of us are probably familiar with some of the cigarette brands that her family produced. And most of you are probably familiar with the Duke University in North Carolina, of which her family was affiliated. This collection was an Indian oral history project and was a 5-year project from the years 1867 to 1972. The Duke Foundation sponsored the cost of these oral history interviews that was a University of Oklahoma project. And these interviews contained all the Indian tribes in Oklahoma. They're all represented by at least 3 or 4 interviews, but possibly more. I know some of the larger tribes seem to have more interviews. The interviews contain information about ceremonies, social conditions, philosophies, and standards of living. And as I mentioned, members of every tribe resident in Oklahoma were interviewed. And the collection includes the original tapes on which the interviews were recorded, as well as microfiche copies of the typescripts. The digital representation of the typescripts are organized by tribe, but may be searched by interviewee, by interviewer, or by tape number, or by keyword searching of the full text of the transcript. And incidentally, it's very easy to research in this. And many times you can just type in the name and it may bring up something. But I find it very easy to look at these typescripts. And incidentally, the people who transcribe these from a tape recorder, I just applaud them, because I tried many years ago to do that, to transcribe from a tape recorder, and it was impossible for me. I just couldn't do it. And I was an experienced transcriber, and it was just too time consuming. The first, I can't read every single part of the interview, but I'm just going to hit the highlights of several interviews. This one, it's tape number 249, and it's the second of 2 interviews. Anawake Chukalat Webb, Cherokee, interviewed by J.W. Tyner. Interview date, April the 8th, 1968. Transcribed by Linda Butler. Proofread by Nona Kerr. General subject, burial customs, preserving and preparing foods, schools, dress, curing tobacco. Topics discussed, brief introduction, preparation for burial of the dead, use of old smokehouses and canning and drying of fruits in early days, use of Indian corn and wild vegetables, mushrooms. Early day Indians knew many kinds of roots and herbs which were used for food and medicine. Regrets that the use of the Cherokee language is disappearing. Schools and family relations. Early day dress for men and women. Use of tobacco among Indians in early days. Ben Hulbert established the Hulbert community and town. Cooking and serving meals in early days. Church incident which led to death of father. And I'm only going to read the burial customs in this interview. The background of the informant. Anawake Chukalat Webb was 65 years of age at the time of this interview. She attended Sequoia Orphans Training School, and in parentheses, now Sequoia Vocational School. Mrs. Webb was born and reared near Hulbert, Oklahoma. And note, the other interview on this tape is Sam Hyder, Cherokee. Informant, Mrs. Anawake Webb, Cherokee, interviewed by J.W. Tyner, April the 8th, 1968. Brief introduction, April the 8th, 1968. Today I'm visiting with Anawake Webb, a full-blood Cherokee of Porter Community, Wagner County, Oklahoma. She telling of many experiences in her life in her original home community of Hulbert Community, Cherokee County. Preparation for burial of dead. And the first few sentences are not clear. But we had a washing machine and we made our own soap. We had beds and we had chairs. And the interviewer asks, "Did you have a fireplace too?" Yes, we had a big fireplace. We just moved into, and it's not clear on the tape. I know my uncle was sick and we moved with them. They had a big house. They had living room, dining room, and 3 bedrooms, and then the tape is not clear. Mrs. Webb, back in those early days, how did they prepare their dead for burial? Well, when my uncle died, they laid him out and the men took turns staying up all night, and the men made the coffin and the women would serve coffee, and they made the coffin outside and they served these men coffee, and that's all they drink is just coffee. And we didn't have cake like we do nowadays. You know, we serve coffee and cake together now, but they didn't in them days. They just serve coffee to the men and they just hammer there all night long. They be hammer away. I know I was just 4 years old, no better than 4 years old, and my father built the place. But I remember it. I know I stay right close to Mother wherever she's at. They have coffee in the living room and they have him laid out on 2 planks, 2 wide planks, and they had a sheet over him until they got the coffee made. And the women folks, after they got the coffee ready, the women folks, then they had their little part to do. They lined it with silk. It was sateen, we used to call it, shiny on one side and rough on the other. And they line it with black and white. And it was a beautiful coffin after they got it finished. It was just awful beautiful. They just make it themselves, and it was good and stout. One thing about it was stout. So that's the way they done. And they don't do them nowadays like they used to. They used to go set up days, and no matter how long it lasted, people would always be there sitting up. They sit up all night long, but they don't do that nowadays. And the interviewer says, I've often wondered, since they didn't have undertakers, just how they did it. Well, they didn't embalm them. They just put them away just as quick as they could. They put them away just as quick as they could because they didn't have no way to keep them long. And they just didn't have no way. And when they got the body ready to go to the cemetery, well, they loaded it the way we done Papa and all the rest of the people. Of course, there wasn't no cars in those days that I remember ever taking them in the car, but they just loaded them up and put them in the wagon, and we traveled real slow to the graveyard, and it was about 3 miles to the graveyard, and it took us a long time to get there in a wagon, you know. And the interviewer asked, what ritual did they use in those days at the graveside service? Or did they? Is it different than to what it is now? Well, as far as I can remember, they had it almost like they have it nowadays, but they must have other ways. Now, the Cherokees was different from other tribes. The Cherokees just sang songs and just do like we do now. Only the coffin stood open the whole time they was holding their singing and preaching. They done their preaching and their singing, and they just do it almost like they do now. But they had the coffin open the whole time they was taking the singing. Is anybody checking the time on me? No. So that I don't get carried away. I could
You're
get
doing
carried
fine.
away.
We'll call you.
Okay,
Go
just
to-
say stop. Okay. The next interview I'm going to give you is the tape number is T305, and it's the second of 2 interviews. It's Lindsay Mays, Cherokee, and he was interviewed by J.W. Tyner, and the interview date was August the 9th, 1968, and transcribed by Linda Butler, proofread by Nona Kerr. General subject, Grand River, ferry boats, Locust Grove community and education. Topics discussed, brief introduction, Hogan Institute subscription school, bridges across Grand River, he worked hard to get them, salt wells in the area, plenty of timber in early days, helped saw logs and float them down the river to Fort Smith, lived in the area all his life and has seen many changes, schooling at Cherokee Male Seminary, 1904 to 1908, board sidewalks, proud of fireplace in his home, showed pictures of his brother. Background of informant. Lindsay Mays was 78 years of age at the time of this interview. He lives near Locust Grove, Oklahoma, and was born and reared in this area. His father, Wash Mays, was High Sheriff of the Cherokee Nation. He attended Hogan Institute and Cherokee Male Seminary. 2 of his uncles, Joel Mays and Samuel Mays, were early day Cherokee chiefs. And note, the other interview on this tape is John Ticketer, Cherokee. Okay, let me get to the part that I want to read. I want to read about his experiences at the Cherokee Male Seminary. When did you go to the seminary? I went 1904 and left in 1908. Spent 4 years. I always wish I had gone back, but I never did go back. Fall came and I had to work some. Time come to go back to school and I never did go back. Well, I guess you had quite a time down there, didn't you? Oh yeah, it was a wonderful school. It's a cheap school, you know. Good school. School where they learn you about everything. Learn how to be a man and then the tape is not clear there. Learn how to drill and all that stuff. It was a good place for a boy, but a lot of them didn't think it was. A lot of them run off, but it was like home. And the interviewer says, you weren't confined there to any extent. You had lots of privileges. Oh yes, as long as you done right. On weekends, they let you go places. It was a wonderful school for Indian boys. Got acquainted with so many boys. And then the interviewer says, Tahlequah, what was it like when you were going to school down there? You know, we used to go to school there. Sometimes they have a party over at the female seminary and ask us boys over. We'd go over there and had old board sidewalk. You know what they are, don't you? And the interviewer, I know what it is, but I've never seen that one. Had them through town and plumb up to the seminary. And we'd go up there and stay till midnight and go to school and all go home. Go back down through town on that old board sidewalk. Sound like a freight train coming through town. Those boys are talking, you know. And then he laughed. And the interviewer says, yeah, that would make a lot of noise, several of you. And he says, them boys can't remember that, but I can. Walk on them old board sidewalks. And the interviewer says, well, did you have the big trees there then? Yeah, big trees. We'd go down through them trees. Well, did the seminary have a band? Yes, string band. Those boys behaved themselves. They wouldn't let them play much. They get to playing and pretty soon the room be full and the teacher would allow that. Make them scat out, but they'd play anyway. And the interviewer asked, what was the water supply for the seminary? Oh, they had a tank, water tank on the wagon. They hauled it. They had a big tank and it was built on a wagon and had the end of it had a little old faucet on it. You stick it down in the bucket and get a bucket of water. The man that hauled it up from the spring. And the interviewer asked, from town there? No, there was a spring there and he hauled every day. Put the wagon down there under the big tree. That's the way we have water. We carry water up to our rooms in bucket and we wash our hands and faces in it, you know, and pour it in another bucket. When that bucket got full, we carry it off. And that's the end of his interview about the male seminary. However, there's lots more to the interview. And
Excuse me, Mary Bell,
yes,
these interviews were made in the 1960s, weren't they, the late 60s?
1968 to 1972.
Okay,
And many of the people were elderly back then.
right.
So they could remember, you know, things that happened that the next generation wouldn't remember. And this is the interview by Sarah Cheater. And it's tape number 379, and it's the fourth of 4 interviews. Interviewed by J.W. Tyner, and the interview date is March the 3rd, 1969. And the general subject was burial place of Stan Wadey, making, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this, Eva probably would know how to pronounce it, making honeycomb and hickory nut dish, old burial grounds in the cemetery, favorite foods, life history materials, topics discussed, introduction, many cemeteries in the area, grave of Stan Wadey, more about Cherokees, early school at Butler, laments the fact that so few of items used in early days have not been preserved, sawmills in early days, early day farming and gardens, no plans to move to town, church in early days, camp for 3 or 4 days, compares early days with present time. Tanachi Squirrel was a preacher, Kanihani a food, other Indian foods in preparation, discussion of why Indians live to be old, town of Jay and Southwest City, Indian courthouse, Cherokee business, Jess Muskrat, Split Log was the Seneca Indians, discipline with children, early days and today, school books in early day schools, burial customs, weather conditions seem to have changed since early days, hog killing time and other foods, neighbors were friends in early days, great-grandparents came on Trail of Tears. Background of the informant, Sarah Wright Cheater was born around 1885. She is full-blood Cherokee and was born on Whitewater Creek in Delaware County and has lived in this area all her life. Mrs. Cheater is still active and has a good memory of past events, both personal and historical. And now I'm going to skip over some of this because I know there's not really that much time. Okay, the interviewer. I've been interested in that Stan Wadey family. Did Stan Wadey die before his wife? No, I think she died before he did. Now, I'm not sure. I don't remember anything about that. Well, I've read that she died before he did, but the dates on the markers must be wrong. They show him that he died in 1871 and she died in 1883. She died 12 years later. Yeah. Everybody, and this is the interview, everybody I've talked to say that he died after she did. Well, you know, originally his wife and 2 children were buried over in Oldfield Bend. And then it goes to topic grave of Stan Wadey. Yeah, that's the graves I was telling you about when you came. You know, they said Stan Wadey was buried there, and there was someone told me it was his wife and his babies. Yeah, wife and 2 babies. And then she says, I've seen the monument. And then the interviewer, now they've moved that monument over to Polson for his wife and 2 babies. And she said, the interviewee says they did, and the interviewer says yes, there's nothing over at Oldfield Bend now, it's all gone. And did you hear if Stan Wadey was buried there to begin with in Polson? Yeah, I heard Mother say that he was. And the interviewer, he was buried there to begin with? Uh-huh. Well, that's what I wanted to find out because I've been reading the history books and they're all mixed up. And then there's static on the recorder. Yes, ma'am, I have. That don't tell us much. No. And then it goes on, she was kin to old Cooey Bill. Did you ever hear of him? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, she was. Did he marry a sister or something? Now, I don't remember that. I didn't pay much attention when they was talking. And the interviewer says yes. And then she says, there ought to be some folks living out there somewhere in that Oldfield Bend, as they call it, the name of. I can't think of that name now. Back over. Informant is speaking too low for transcription. So it was extremely difficult for the person. I can see that it would be a nightmare for the person that was transcribing these interviews. But and especially back then when it was just a tape recorder. Now they all live over in there somewhere, some of them, and then there's static on the recorder. And the main name of it is Polson. And more about cemeteries. Yes, ma'am. Now, do you know anything about the Hildebrand Cemetery? It was down on the river and they moved it, but I don't know where they moved it to. Well, now there is one back up the hill from the river now that they call Hildebrand, and they're all Indians in it. Yeah, there's Rogue and Jim and John and Joe. Yeah, those are all in there. I've got that one recorded today. You did? And now there's several Chocolots there too, and Downings, lots of Downings. Yeah, I imagine they moved that Hildebrand graveyard, put it up there. Well, it looks like they moved it the way it looks now, but there's only about half of the graves that have markers there. Yeah, all the rest of them are just have unmarked stones there. Yeah. So I've done as much as I could do on that one. And so I've made quite a bit of progress, and that's the interviewer speaking. And then she says, Hickory Grove, or one or the other now. It's down there not too far from the other. Hickory Grove graveyard is still down there. I think they bury there yet. And the interviewer says, yes, ma'am. And she says lots of them bury where they want to. And the interviewer asks her, how long have you been here, Mrs. Cheater? I moved here in 1904. 1904? Well, you've been here quite a while then, haven't you? And he asks her, the interviewer, where was your original home? Right down here, about 1.5 miles north to the northeast on that Southwest City Road. And the interviewer says, well, there's been a lot of changes that you've seen here, I guess. And she says, oh, yeah. And he says, roads have changed. And she says, still a-making them. And so that's all of the interview I'll give for Sarah Cheater, which I found very interesting. And here is the last one that I have for this morning. And the tape number is 422, and it's the second of 4 interviews. Rufus Lacey, Cherokee, interviewed by J.W. Tyner. Interview date, April the 22nd, 1969. Transcribed by Darlene Fields. General subject, Goingsnake District. Many Cherokees fought in Civil War. Life history material. Topics discussed. Brief introduction. Early day school. Churches and schools use same house. Cemeteries, location, and people who are buried there. Mention some early day families. Many changes since early days. 6 killer families. Father was a court judge in Goingsnake District. Many shooting scrapes in early days. Zeke Proctor. Members of family who were in military service. Kanachi drying corn, timber in the early days, hog market, fishing in early days, allotment locations, no grist mill in early days. Excuse me. Background of informant. Rufus Lacey was born in 1887 in the Cherokee Nation. Mr. Lacey is a full-blood Cherokee and lives in Adair County near Westville, Oklahoma. He makes his home with a daughter. Before statehood, Mr. Lacey walked across the mountain to attend school at the Baptist Mission. Even in his advanced age, Mr. Lacey is still very active and continues to walk great distances around his part of the country. And note, other interviews on this tape are Ben Henry, Cherokee, Lucinda Sanders, Wilhite, Cherokee, Lucinda Crittenden King. Brief introduction, April the 21st, 1969. Today I'm visiting with Rufus Lacey, an 82-year-old full-blood Cherokee of Alberti's Prairie, Adair County, Oklahoma. Mr. Lacey talks about the old days of this part of the country, its places and its peoples. Early day schools, churches and schools use the same house alternately. Yeah, grandfather. Yeah, your grandfather. The big house burnt down there. And incidentally, this interview, I believe they're in an automobile during this interview. The big house burnt down here, right here in the center of this section here. Then we built a log house. We had 2 houses that burnt down over there. And then you had to walk across the mountain to go to school. No, the road ran right straight north of us, right straight to the church house. These section lines weren't known in them days, you know. And the interviewer says, "Oh, I see now." Yeah. And he says, "If we have to, we had their schoolhouse right north of here." And then it goes on after statehood. So there's evidently a gap there, or maybe the person transcribing couldn't understand. Yeah, what did they call this schoolhouse? Well, after established a schoolhouse up here, they called it Morris Schoolhouse. Morris School, yeah. Let's go inside. Well, I tell you, this is where old Morris Schoolhouse located. Where was it before they moved it here? Well, there was a church. There was the church house. Oh, this was the church house. After they moved it here, that was the old Morris place. They just called it. And then we'll go on to mentioning, let's see, the last part of the interview. Okay, now Uncle, and I'm going to skip on down to the Six Killer family. And Uncle Abe's father was named Soldier Six Killer. Yeah, and there was Redbird Six Killer. There was all kinds of Six Killers. And the interviewer says, "Redbird Six Killer?" And he says, "Yeah." And one of them was named Cricket. Cricket, I've heard of him. One of them's name was Frog. I've heard of him too. Yeah, had lots of kinfolks. Yeah, a long time ago, everybody knew everybody else. Kept in touch with everybody. Yeah, don't reckon we lost none. Don't seem like we've gone far enough yet. And you can tell they're in a car. These roads have changed around, though, paved. And the interviewer says, "Yeah, I guess after 70 years, they've changed a whole lot." And then they laugh. And he says, yeah, they've just changed everywhere. That's the old Six Killer place here. yeah, that is where old Abraham Six Killer was raised. And the interviewer says, well, my goodness. And he says, this here was Old Soldier Six Killer place. And the Old Soldier Six Killer's place. And he says that was his father. Yeah, well, this is an old place then. Sure is. Now, Soldier Six Killer, he's the one that came from Georgia, wasn't it? And he says, now I read about one. Yes, and the sentence isn't clear. This is an old road, and then the subject changes to the road. And he says, this is an old road right here. And the interviewer says, yeah. And he goes on to talk and says his father was a court judge in Goingsnake. Was this Goingsnake district? Yes. Where was their courthouse? Down there, what they call Strawberry Spring, right down on 62 Highway, Strawberry Springs. Was that close to Christie? Yes, back this way. Yeah, just about 5 miles. And then the word wasn't clear on the tape. They used to have lots of business going on there at one time. Yeah. Yeah, my father was on a jury one time, 2 or 3 times. And the interviewer says, well, your daddy was a judge? And he says, yeah. And the interviewer says, well, that's good. And he says he was a counsel, a senator. He worked with the Dawes Commission when they enrolled back in 1902. That's where Charlie Cox is. Now that's Frank Cox's father used to rent a store there. Yeah. Of course, the roads have changed. You wouldn't hardly know. Oh, yeah, everything has changed now. And they had a high sheriff down there too, didn't they? Oh, yeah. I don't know who it was, but I read about it one time. And so this concludes my Cherokee moments. And I hope, like I mentioned before, many of you may have already researched in these, and those of you who haven't, maybe you'll get into it because it's all online, and I find it pretty easy to get into the interviews. That concludes my moments for this morning. David, did I take up 30 minutes or more?
I think right close to that.
Okay, good.
You did well, Mary Bell.
I timed it just right, didn't I?
And those were interesting.
Interesting, very interesting.
Oh yeah, they're interesting because they go into everything. I mean, you know, history of all these the towns and about people and just about life, and very interesting.
I thought it was really interesting that Tyner was asking all the questions. He was graveyard searching, wasn't he?
Yes, he was paying close attention to asking them about each one of those people
About the cemeteries.
About the cemeteries. Yes,
My
and of course they were mostly traveling in a car so that they could see these different places.
I understand right that the spring that the one interviewee was talking about, that was at the male seminary?
Yes.
Does anyone know if that spring is still there and what the name of it was?
I think that's the town spring, isn't it, Jack?
Well, that's at the female seminary.
Oh, is that that's right. That's a female seminary.
And wasn't the male seminary to the southwest?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I don't.
Shirley might know that.
I'm not as familiar with that area as I should be, so I don't know if there's still a spring in that area or not. Shirley, do you have any idea?
I bet you Jim's trying to figure out if it's his ancestors' spring. Jim?
Oh, yeah. James Hendricks owned the property there right before it was given to the Cherokee Nation for the second female seminary. And I know they had contaminant. Luke has given me information about how that spring was contaminated and caused some problems at the female seminary. But that was referred to as the Hendricks Spring at one time, and then the seminary spring, and I think they call it the town spring now, maybe.
Would some of that, would some of those springs show up on those old maps?
I don't remember seeing any on the old maps.
I've looked for a spring around the male seminary on modern topo maps, and I don't see any indication of a spring there. So that's why I was curious.
No.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Well, our next speaker, I think you all know, is Mr. Hampton.
Let's see. Luke, I'm going to have share screen here.
Should be ready to go.
Am I? Can you see my screen?
See your hand.
Yeah.
Well,
You've got to click the green button at the bottom, David, that shows.
yeah, I'm clicking.
Okay.
Your screen. Hmm.
Jack, can I ask you a question real quick while David's clicking? You know of a woman named Thea Baker?
Jim, Thea Baker was someone who was this Troy Poteet. She
Yeah.
was involved with DNA testing.
Yes.
She was some kind of an expert at that.
Yeah.
And I think she helped me have mine done. It fit into some sort of research that she was doing.
Right. I've talked to another woman, a Laura Gann in Oklahoma, and she was trying to get me in touch with her about some DNA.
Laura, and
I could participate in.
I'm much better acquainted with Laura. She married a distant cousin and did a lot of family research about the Gann family.
Yeah.
And they're credible people. Laura's a serious researcher. She's about quit that now, but you know, you can't ever fully turn it loose. So
Yeah.
I'd encourage you to get with them. They're credible, serious people.
Good. Thank you.
I once went to the Gann family had a national. David's ready. We'll visit later. You call me.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. First, I want to say about Mary Bell's presentation. My grandfather was interviewed by Tyner,
Oh,
who was actually his nephew, and George Young. So if you ever read his interview, don't believe the genealogy that my grandfather presents in his interview.
I read his interview. I saw it and I read it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it would have been nice to include it, Mary Bell, but that we'll do
Well,
that.
I was gonna email you and ask you if it would be all right to include it, but I didn't.
Okay. Today I'm going to talk about John Drew. We all know John Drew from being a detachment leader, and we use his birthday for him of December the 25th, 1796. I'm always a little suspicious when early Cherokees use December the 25th as a birth date because I think a lot of them didn't know their birth date and they chose Christmas Day. This is a picture of John Drew that survives. And there's a dissertation about him by a man named Mark Hellstern. And Dr. Hellstern died in 2011. Jack told me that he had some discussions with him prior to his death, and Jack actually didn't even know that he had died. We know that it's pretty likely that John Drew was born near Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, and his father was William Drew, although Dr. Hellstern didn't put that in his dissertation. It's not certain who John Drew's mother is. He had two prominent brothers, William Drew and Richard Drew. The family immigrated to Arkansas in 1809, which is one of the very early old settler movements. And they settled along the St. Francis River. You can see here where the St. Francis River flows from Missouri down and it forms the western part of the Missouri Boot Heel and then flows into the Mississippi south of Memphis. Now, Dr. Hellstern mentions in his dissertation that John Drew was in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, but I don't believe that's right. I couldn't find him on any of the muster rolls, and of course his location being in Arkansas would be quite far away from where the Horseshoe Bend people were gathered. After the Cherokees moved from the St. Francis River area, you'll see the part that the Cherokee Nation was given for the Western Cherokees to live. This land was actually given to the old settler Cherokees as part of the Treaty of 1817, and a similar amount of land was ceded by the tribe in the east. Now, John Drew married to 4 times. You'll see all of his 4 wives mentioned here and the names of the children by each wife. Mariah Cootie is listed sometimes as being a niece of John Ross, but she was not. She was from a different Cootie family. His last wife, and the one best known, is Charlotte Gordon Scales. Now, in 1828, there was a treaty between the Western Cherokees and the United States, which ceded their land in Arkansas for what is now the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. And right here, as part of the Article 2 of the treaty, is the exact boundary that was given to the Cherokees that formed the Cherokee Nation. We're not going to read through all of that. Now, when the Cherokees in Arkansas moved to Oklahoma, generally, which was in 1829, they were paid for any improvements that they left. You can see here John Drew, which was number 9 on this page of improvements, had land, apple trees, large and small peach trees, and cabins, and his total valuation was $681.62.5. That was not the largest by far, but it was one of the larger amounts of the valuations of the Western Cherokees when they moved into Oklahoma. Now, as an old settler representative, Drew was frequently representing them in business in Washington and in the Eastern Cherokee Nation. And that is apparently how he happened to be in the East when the forced removal began. And he was appointed one of the detachment leaders by Chief Ross. He led the smallest detachment. Some of the people say that many of the persons in his detachment were ill. I could not find that John Drew was ever elected to any Cherokee office. But in August of 1861, 4,000 Cherokees attended a meeting in Tahlequah to discuss the Cherokee neutrality in the Civil War. However, the speeches were one-sided, mainly favoring an alliance with the Confederacy, who had representatives attending, but the Union had none. Chief Ross indicated his wish to have an alliance with the Confederacy, and the executive committee, composed of Chief Ross, James Vann, James Brown, John Drew, and William Potter Ross, voted unanimously to ally with the Confederacy. A Cherokee Mounted Regiment was created for the purpose. To be prepared for any such emergency, we have deemed it prudent to proceed to organize a regiment of mounted men and tender them for service. They will require to be armed. Having abandoned our neutrality and espoused the cause of the Confederate States, we are ready and willing to do all in our power to advance and sustain it. Chief Ross appointed John Drew to head the regiment. At that time, Stan Wadey was already recruiting Treaty Party supporters and mixed blood Cherokees into another Confederate regiment, and Drew's regiment, though still supporting the South, was kind of a counterbalance, favoring the Ross faction of the tribe, and its members were loyal to the chief. Besides Drew, the well-known officers were William Potter Ross, Thomas Pegg, James Springston Vann, Frederick Augustus Kerr, and the chaplain was Reverend Lewis Downing. Now, most of the enlisted members of Drew's regiment were members of the Kasuah Society, followers of Reverend Evan Jones. Now, Colonel Drew's regiment did see some action, mainly in defense of Kansas in the Northern Cherokee Nation in Cowiskwe District. And in the winter of 1861 and 2, the regiment was in bad circumstances regarding food and supplies. And that month, a Cherokee Union contingent led by Captain James McDaniel met with some of Drew's officers, Major Thomas Pegg, Reverend Lewis Downing, Captain George Scraper, and Captain John Porum Davis about switching sides. Many, if not most, of Drew's regiment eventually enlisted with the Union. However, Drew himself did not. You see here, this is a map of some of the engagements in that early part of the Civil War. This map comes from this book by W. Craig Gaines about the Confederate Cherokees, John Drew's Regiment of Mounted Rifles. Now, John Drew had many papers, and they are preserved in the Helmrich Center at Gilcrease and have been digitized and are currently online and searchable. And I think the digitization was paid for by Jack Baker's discretionary funds as he was leaving the council. So that was an important step toward preserving some of John Drew's records. This is the beginning page from the Gilcrease website, which begins the finding aid for the John Drew papers. If you want to find these, you can go to Google and search John Drew Finding Aid Gilcrease, and this page will pop up as the first entry. So you don't have to jot down the website address at the top here. Now, inside here is an actual finding aid with the description of each folder, an approximate date, and there's a place on there for you to click, and you'll actually see the documents open up for you after you find documents in the finding aid that you're interested in looking at. Now, his papers, there are many business transactions with various Cherokees. He apparently loaned lots of old settlers money after the Treaty of 1846 to be repaid when they received their payment. And one interesting thing from these set of documents that you don't find necessarily in John Ross's papers is a whole lot of official looking documents from before the Civil War. Now, many family papers and other documents extend for many years after his death, and they are not always related to his family. There are 613 folders of documents. Now, this document that I put here is a list of Cherokees who were in the Battle of Horseshoe that John Drew felt were deserving of pensions. And you'll notice one of them is about a third of the way down the page, Goingsnake, a warrior in Captain John Brown's company, wounded 27 March 1814, died 21 of February 1841. Disability total 26 years, 11 months, and 22 days at $8 a month for a total payment of $2,586.93 and a third. I never heard of a third of a penny, but I guess they were pretty exact. Now, this date for the death of Goingsnake, or Goingsnake as he was enlisted under, is a different date than what we've had previously, which we got from his pension application. And I believe it's much more likely this date is the exact date of Goingsnake's death. Now, the last folder of the John Drew papers contains this unidentified tintype. And I have no idea who that is. It's probably a member of his family, likely a daughter would be my guess, but of course, I don't know. Now there's, if I can, I was going to show a couple of other documents from his papers here that I've opened up already. Am I still sharing screen?
No.
No.
Okay, let me, this is what the finding aid looks like. And you see along the left-hand side, this is where you click to open a document up. And you see, I've opened it up at a spot where John Drew has promissory notes from different people. And you'll see here there are many, many promissory notes. These are old settlers that he loaned money to be repaid when they did receive their money. And now some of these don't say who they are. I'll open one up here and you can see this is from Nan. We don't know for sure who she is, but she was a Cherokee old settler and John Drew loaned her $20.12, it says. Here is a list that John Drew prepared of old settlers left off the census roll. You can see all of these names listed here. I didn't go back to see if these people were later added to the census roll or not. I would suspect some of them were. Now, John Drew died on August 25th, 1865. There's a discussion of his burial in the dissertation by Dr. Helstern, and that came from the Indian Pioneer Papers, which is also in the Western History collection that you can search when you're looking at the Doris Duke papers. The Indian Pioneer Papers are also there. And he had a store near the Bayou Menard, which is between Fort Gibson and Tahlequah. And he was buried there near his store, according to his granddaughter. And Jack and I were talking about he would be an old settler eligible for marking because he came on by the Trail of Tears, because he came on the Trail of Tears as a detachment leader. However, as far as I can find, his grave is not preserved today. So I don't know whether he never had a stone there or whether it was destroyed, because apparently there's no stone there now. And we don't know exactly where John Drew's grave is, but it's near the Bayou Menard. You'll see that area when you drive from Fort Gibson to Tahlequah. So does anybody have any questions I might be able to answer?
Yeah, how did his papers get to the Gilcrease?
I don't know, and I don't think it had a good discussion of that. Jack, do you know?
No, I don't.
Wow.
But
David, I had a question about the 1828 treaty where you said they exchanged land in Arkansas for land where the Cherokee Nation is today?
Yes,
Did I understand that correctly?
yes.
So that seems odd to me, because it would seem like if we already had traded for that land, then why did we have to trade lands in the East again for it?
We didn't trade lands in the East. We traded the Arkansas lands for the Cherokee Nation and Oklahoma lands.
Right, but then what? So we in the 1835 treaty, we weren't exchanging land in the East again for the same land?
Well, in the 1835, they were exchanging lands for money.
Okay.
There was no more land given because the Cherokees already had land in Oklahoma, but they did supposedly receive money to compensate them for the land that they were giving up.
I see. So are the boundaries of the 1828 treaty the same exact boundaries of the Cherokee Nation in 1839?
I think so. Is that right, Jack?
I believe so. Although I think they may have added the outlet lands at one point.
Yeah, the outlet land that goes through Osage County and west along the northern border of Oklahoma, but the Cherokees sold that later and received money for that.
All right, thanks.
David, you mentioned two brothers of John Drew. I knew Richard. Who was the other one?
William Drew was a brother of his.
William. Okay.
Yes, both of them, I think, have been elected at some times to Cherokee offices.
William Drew Sr., whom I believe was right, had the three sons. And David, I'm somewhere, some of the claims, I believe it refers to Laffetmush as an uncle of John Drew.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And Laffetmush's half brother was the Thompson, Jack Thompson, that had several children. And then also in those claims, John Drew is representing those Thompson children too, which evidently would have been his first cousins.
Yeah, John Drew's middle name is supposed to be Thompson.
So that's, so did not have John Drew in the Thompson family, but I'm pretty certain that he belongs in there. And actually, the Nakui, who's listed as a sister, could be John Drew's mother, who's a sister to Laffetmush. But also, I was going to say, David, John Drew's last wife, the Scales, wasn't she a granddaughter of the Cooties that were related to John Ross?
Let me look here and see who.
Yes, she was. She was Daniel Cootie's daughter and Joab Scales' sister.
Right.
And she's buried just north and west of my office here, just off the section line. Her grave's kind of in bad shape. It's the only one out there. It's by itself and it's fallen over.
Oh.
Troy, why wouldn't she have been buried by him?
Because I think she died before he did, David.
Oh no, she died in 1871, 6 years after him, not that long.
Okay, well, they lived here, and he had a business, maybe a house at Menard Bayou, and I think I read an interview where they talked about he was at some Ross's house, some relatives, when he died, and somebody told all.
Yeah, Daniel Hicks Ross. He was at his house when he died.
And it might have been because of the water or the time of the year, but they didn't. They buried him up there instead of bringing him down here. And I think that he had a home place up there also. I think down here might have been more to than, but this was where she lived. You know, we know kind of where the place was from Black Fox's. I was going to say that Frankie Sue Gillum, who lives at Menard, their allotments are just across the county line, and I think she has researched out and knows where that grave is, and it's remote and very difficult to reach. She might have.
Can you find out where that is, and is there a marker there?
I think that Frankie Sue probably did an article in her Twin Territories magazine back in the 90s about that, but we'll send a message to her. She's John Ross's mother-in-law. Her daughter, she took care of Talentesky Courthouse a long time. Comes Little Terrapin, who was the interpreter there, is her ancestor. But I think we can find that, and she'll share it with everybody if she's got it. Should lead us to the article, probably.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, I would like to tell you all, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. There's a symposium this week between Wake Forest University and the Moravian Archives, and it's an interdisciplinary town and gown conference, Becoming American, Moravians and Their Neighbors. And Luke is going to send out a link to this, but here is, it's all online, but it talks about the Moravians, but also their association with the Cherokees. It'll take a tour. Well, this one, Walk and Learn Visual Tours, 2 to 3 on Thursday, is Moravians and Their Neighbors, the American Indian Contacts at Mazda, which is the Southern Decorative Museum of Southern Decorative Arts. But they have a large number of portraits of different people. They have a great one of a Cherokee, a Creek child, but they have other Cherokee items there. And they're the ones that have the baskets that Peggy Van sent back to the Moravians in Salem. So they have all those baskets from the 18 teens. And I think part of them, if not all of them, are in Sarah Hill's book on Weaving New Worlds. But unfortunately, this Cherokee presentation has changed because of the death of
P.J. Holland.
Yeah. Actually, it looks like they've changed this since I saw it earlier today. Because Tom Bell had said that he did not think that he could do it without TJ, because he and TJ were scheduled. And earlier today, it had the old deal that had Tom Bell and TJ Holland and Constance. So it looks like they've taken him out, and it looks like he must have agreed to go ahead and come and do the presentation. So, but anyway, you can click on it later and look at the full schedule, and you can register for all sessions or register for part of the sessions. Either way.